For those who don't know me, good evening, everybody. I'm Patrick Little. I'm the CEO of the Migraine Association of Ireland, and I'm also president of the European Migraine and Headache Alliance. And on behalf of both organisations, I'm delighted that people have joined us, and I'd like to welcome you to the seminar, which is kindly sponsored by our corporate partners. The Together Talks began last year as part of a series across Europe to highlight both common issues and differences in how migraine is dealt with in different countries. The European Migraine and Headache Alliance, for people who don't know, is an alliance of migraine patient organisations in over 30 countries across Europe and has been on the go for some time now. And one of the main projects just now is to build a migraine movement internationally. And if you haven't already done so, I'd encourage you to join us. Just put in migraine movement into your search engine and you'll find what's happening across Europe in relation to migraine just now. As most of you will probably know, health is a devolved issue within Europe. And as I mentioned, this leads to both commonalities, but particularly differences because of different health systems and therefore access to medication and treatment. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what Jeff has unearthed in his research for his presentation. Without any further ado then, I'll go back to Saiv, who's the Regional Development Work Officer for the Migraine Association of Ireland and is going to facilitate the evening. Thanks, Saiv, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. And hello and welcome once again, everybody. My name is Saiv, as Pat said. I'm the Regional Development Officer with the Migraine Association of Ireland. You are all very welcome to our webinar this evening. I'll just go over a few little etiquette because it's a little bit different than the Zoom meetings that we normally use. So you will all automatically have no camera on, we can't see you, and you have no audio. But I do hope that you can hear us all very clearly. If you have any issues, technical issues, please feel free to use the chat function that is down the bottom. Jeff Smith will be going through his presentation, which I'm very excited for. A lot of research has gone into it, so it'll be great to hear. And we will hopefully have time for questions and answers at the end. So please, there's a Q&A box, so please feel free to type any questions you have that come up during it, and we will try and go through them at the end. Or if you have any questions that I can answer, I most certainly will. So we are very fortunate to be and honoured to be joined by Jeff Smith, MD. Jeff is a physician by training and has worked for pharmaceutical companies for the last 30 years, most recently with Alder Biopharmaceuticals, who have developed one of the CGRP medications. The company has recently taken over by Lundbeck, which has led Jeff to his retirement from the company, but Jeff is now a board member of the Migraine Association of Ireland. So Jeff is very familiar with some of the issues that we'll be discussing and is passionate about patient advocacy. So I will hand over to you, Jeff, and thank you.
Thanks, Simon. That's a fantastic introduction. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming on this presentation. As Simon and Pat have alluded to, I have a long history of working in the migraine space, namely in developing one of the new medicines. I was a founder of a company in Seattle called Alder Biopharmaceuticals that was basically responsible for developing one of the anti-CGRP antibodies that some of you may have heard about. And that company was sold to Lundbeck, and my financial, if you like, interest in migraine obviously went at that stage. And however, I retired to Ireland, and I still, my mother's a migraineur, my sister's a migraineur. I feel very passionate about migraine patients and the issues they face. So I was very happy when Pat invited me to be on the board of MAI, because I feel there's still a lot to fight for in this disease and getting people access to drugs and treatments and other treatment modalities. Anyway, after that introduction, I thought I'd start out with a few facts about my adopted country. As you'll probably recognise by my accent, I'm not born and bred in Ireland, but I feel Irish, as I've been married to an Irish person now for almost 30 years. So, and I've been back and forth, and I love Ireland, so it's in my blood. Just to give you a few facts about the Republic, population 5 million. Gross domestic products, pretty impressive. It's $476 billion. That's a lot. And the GDP per capita, that's about 90,000 US dollars for every person in Ireland. And interestingly, according to the Organization of Economic Development, the OECD, the Irish are the most productive workforce in Europe, as you can see on the graph, coming in at around 76 euros per hour of productivity. So very impressive. And from all this hard work and energy, the Irish government took in, I'm using 2019 here because pre-COVID, COVID has changed things dramatically, obviously, for hopefully for a temporary couple of years, and then things will return to normal, sort of what I call post-COVID normality. But the Irish government pre-COVID took in 89 billion euros in revenues, which also is a very impressive sum of money. So they get a lot of money, and a lot of it goes into healthcare.
Jeff, may I just interrupt? Sorry, just your slides haven't moved at all. We're still on the first slide.
Oh, are you? I'm moving the slides.
No. Would you like to just stop sharing? We can try reshare again.
Let's. Yeah, I'm sorry.
I apologize.
No, you've got to love Zoom. It's just the way it is, I'm afraid. So if you just end show. Let me stop sharing. Okay, I've stopped sharing.
Yeah, and we can try again.
Apologies, everybody. I mean, I was caught up in, I was just going along there, and you couldn't even see the flipping slide.
It's so live theatre, live theatre. So.
The joys of technology.
Share again. Let me get to presentation. Right. Are they moving now?
No.
No. Slideshow?
Okay, I've got the slideshow up. Yes, no, maybe?
Not moving.
Not moving. Now, why is that? Because I'm sharing.
If you'd like to just end the show and make, oh, there you go.
There we go, we're off. We're off.
Well, hang on. How's that?
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Jeff.
Perfect, right. Dear God, sorry about that. Anyway, so as I was saying, I just wanted to lay the foundation of Ireland in terms of economics, because obviously the economics of a country drive its ability to pay for medicines, amongst other things. So what I wanted to demonstrate here was actually Ireland actually does have a fair bit of cash. So it's not that, you know, it's not that Ireland has difficulty in terms of having, you know, a good economy. Just some general, let me just minimize that, just some general, and again, you know, these statistics, you can get them from several different sources, so they all vary a little bit, but overall they are roughly in the right place. And if you look at government expenditure on healthcare in general, total government expenditure, which was 16.2 billion euros for 2019, Ireland's good. Ireland spends a fair bit on healthcare, and it's right there with the rest of you know, the European countries, matching Japan and etc. So Ireland does spend quite a lot on healthcare. And hang on, let me just, you know, why is it frozen again? Hang on, let me just try again. No, I've frozen for some reason. Let me try again. Oh, here we go. Okay. So if you look at the amount of money too that Ireland spends on pharmaceuticals, and this is the amount of money in US dollars per person. The total spend in Ireland in 2019-2020 was about 2.7 billion euros on medicines. But again, you know, Ireland overall is not paying more or less than anywhere else. It's really in the zone as far as other European countries are concerned. So essentially what I've said is that, you know, as far as healthcare is concerned, Ireland's paying its way overall. It's not lagging in terms of paying for pharmaceuticals overall, and the economy is healthy. But I just want to get to the next point of this presentation, which is to go to the survey, which was very kindly given to me by the MAI, Hazel, and the communications group at the MAI, just to see what the Irish patients' perception of access to care and medication was. And I've focused here on a couple of questions, but basically it was 80 participants took part in the survey, 7 questions in total around access to care, treatment, medication in Ireland compared to other countries. And obviously it was targeted at people with episodic and chronic migraine. And also there were some open questions to get some feedback. But I'm just going to show a couple of slides from this. I'm sure it'll probably be available on the MAI website at some stage, but I just want to focus on a couple of questions. The first of which is question 3, which was, how would you rate medication options for migraine in Ireland on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being the lowest and 10 being the highest? And the key takeaway really was that, you know, the highest number of people scoring was 5. But overall, when you look at it, essentially the majority of people were saying that they felt there was a severe lack of options, so a lack of confidence, if you like, in access to medication in Ireland from the patient standpoint. On the next slide, which was question 5, it was, do you think Ireland is far behind other countries? So it's a kind of yes or no answer. And it's clear that the vast majority of these 80 people felt that Ireland did lag behind other countries. And as you'll see as we go through this presentation, they are correct, essentially. So there is a perception out there, I think, that basically within Ireland, we're lagging, and that perception is actually correct. So the current drugs available in Ireland, and I might have missed a couple. So you have the acute treatments, which are the triptans like sumatriptan, analgesics like aspirin and paracetamol, and the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, ibuprofen. And then on the prevention of migraine side, you have the beta blockers, propranolol, antidepressants like amitriptyline, antiepileptics like topiramate, calcium channel blockers, serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and Botox. So that's currently what's available. And what I should say with Botox is my understanding with botulinum toxin is that reimbursement is patchy. It depends. I think some of the private healthcare companies in Ireland reimburse it, others don't. I'm not sure what the HSE stance is on it. So I don't have a complete picture for Botox. So let's get on to the next bit, which is what's actually available, what's approved from migraine globally, what are the new drugs that are approved? And there are a fairly large number of drugs approved globally, new drugs for migraine. On the acute treatment side, that's where the triptans are. You have lamivudine, which is an Eli Lilly drug, which is another 5-HT receptor agonist. They're different from the triptans. It's a different subset of receptors. And the primary reason for that drug being developed was that there's no cardiovascular effects like the triptans. So it was for people who couldn't tolerate triptans, but would take this. And then there's 2 newer ones, which are the so-called GPANs, or small molecule calcitonin gene receptor antagonists, and that's ubrogepant and rimagepant. And all those drugs are approved, and frankly, quite a few of them are reimbursed too in limited populations for acute treatment in the United States, but none of them are approved in Europe. On the prevention of migraine side, in Europe, fremanezumab, galcanezumab, and erenumab are all approved. Eptinezumab is awaiting approval. It's not approved yet. They're all the anti-CGRP antibodies. And then also, some of these oral anti-CGRPs, such as these are the small molecules, so-called small molecule anti-CGRPs. Rimagepant is approved for prevention. It's also approved for treatment too. And atogepant is under review, but is not yet approved in the US. So this is the landscape for the new drugs. As you can see, a very large number are approved, particularly in the US, but at least on the antibody side, at least 3 are approved in Europe. So that sets the picture in terms of approvals. So this is a bit busy, and I apologize, but this is showing you where in Europe the anti-CGRP antibodies are currently reimbursed, i.e. patients are getting them effectively, and they're getting reimbursed by the government. And admittedly, in most of these countries, it's only for chronic migraine who failed 2 or 3 currently available preventive medicines. And that's common. That's true of the United States to some extent as well, that at the moment, all these drugs are only approved for a subset of patients. But essentially, as you can see, it's a pretty long list of countries, including most of the major EU countries, as well as obviously the individual countries that make up the UK. And even though it's not on here, actually Northern Ireland is another one where these antibodies are available and approved for reimbursement. And you know, candidly, a lot of these countries patients have had access to these medicines for over a year in a lot of the countries. So it's not that they've been recently reimbursed, this has been for some time. Obviously, there are a lot of people, a lot of you on this call may not have chronic migraine, but may have very troublesome, frequent episodic migraine. Unfortunately, for a lot of countries, that's not currently reimbursed. Some countries may, but it's not ubiquitous. So there's still some work yet working on that wider access for patients who do not fit the criteria of chronic migraine. So from that, this is what about Ireland, basically? So where are we in all this? And I just wanted to go very briefly through how drugs are approved and then ultimately get reimbursed or get paid for by the HSE, the Health Service Executive. So what happens in Ireland is that the European Medicines Agency, which is the general EU agency for drug approval, approves the drug. The HPRA, which is the Irish Health Products Regulatory Authority, basically has a look at the EME review, and they have some input, but basically, if they agree with the EMA, they pretty much approve the drugs at the same time. After that, what happens, and this happens commonly in a lot of countries, not just Ireland. This graph could be virtually any country in the world, quite frankly, although obviously the actual individual agencies differ. But what happens is once the drug's approved, i.e. it's been shown to be safe, relatively speaking, and effective, it then gets passed on to what's known as a Health Technology Assessment Group. Now, what the Health Technology Assessments Group do in each country is they look at the particular drug and they decide whether the drug actually is worth the cash. What I mean by that is that does it help in terms of reducing the costs of healthcare overall, and also does it improve the quality of life for patients in a meaningful way? That's essentially what their job is. And they have to give an opinion before any government will reimburse the drugs. So they are an important group. And in Ireland, that's the National Centre for Pharmacoeconomics, the NCPE. And they have a website. And if you Google NCPE, you can go in there and it's very informative. It's a good website. So you can get a lot of information there about what they do. And then after that, you then get to, assuming that the Health Technology Assessment give a positive opinion, then you basically go to what's known as a reimbursement decision, which is carried out in Ireland within the Health Service Executive, the HSE. So that's the process. So, and again, I've got a couple of bits of data here just to show you. So I've shown you the process, and this is a little bit more detailed on this slide, but I wouldn't worry too much about that. But we have official timelines, and what I mean by those, these are the timelines that the governments say how long it takes them to get drugs from approval to being available to patients in their country. So in Ireland, the government stance is it only takes 118 days. And in Belgium, it's 240 days. Don't worry too much about the Netherlands at this stage, but really it's Ireland and Belgium here. But when you go to the actual timelines, at least in this survey, as you can see, the actual timelines within Ireland are much longer than the official timelines. I mean, here it's saying 549 days on average from the time of approval to actually being able to, for people being able to prescribe these drugs. So that's a long time. And it's, to be fair, it's not all the HSE's fault. Sometimes companies don't provide information, and sometimes the pharmaceutical industry can be responsible for some of this delay too. So, you know, it's not one, it's a number of factors that can lead to this. And I think you'll see as I go through my presentation how that's happening in Ireland. Whereas in Belgium, as you can see, they actually beat their official timelines. And the reason for that is, and it's a really important reason that I'll get onto later, and what we really have to fight for, I think, in Ireland. And it's not just Belgium. This is not just true of Belgium. It's also true in the UK and a number of other European countries. What happens is, once in Belgium, the timeline is bound by law, which means that if the government doesn't comply with their timeline, they can be taken to court basically by the patients. So that's a really important thing, that in Belgium, this process is enshrined in law, whereas it's not in Ireland. And it's also enshrined in law in other countries like in the UK. And that's a really important piece of information, as we'll get on to. But again, this is different data. This is another survey done by IQVIA. And it's not 500 and something days, it's basically 496. But as you can see, Ireland is not, you know, it's kind of in the pack. And this is the median time to availability from 2015 to 2018. So it's the time between the European Medicines Agency marketing authorization and then the date of availability to patients in those countries. So in Ireland, it was coming out at around 496 days. And then I really like this slide. This is a really interesting slide from the IQVIA data. What this effectively shows, and what this is it's the number of drugs that are available in each country by approval year from 2015 to 2018. So essentially, in the EMA in those years, approved 172 drugs. And if you look at the top end, so in Germany, 147 of those are available. Denmark, 145. If you look at England, it's 120. Scotland, 95. And then Ireland is down there at 77. So what this is telling you is that there is a very effective block between approval and reimbursement going on, and it's, you know, in Ireland it's really strong. And if you look at the individual bars, sorry if I just point at this very quickly, if you look at the individual bars, what's interesting is obviously the lightest green is 2015, and then, you know, and each year gets progressively darker. What you see is that the number of drugs that are getting through is decreasing as we go from 2000. So it's getting worse, it's not getting better. Whereas, for instance, in Scotland, things have stayed pretty constant in what they're approving, and the UK and others. So in Ireland, something's going on, which is that less drugs are getting through. And it's not obvious to me why, but I'll show you some of the processes as we move forward. But this is a really interesting slide, and it's across all diseases. So I want to take one specific example here, fremanezumab, which is one of the monoclonal antibodies. And the only reason I'm picking fremanezumab is it's the one I could get the most information on, frankly. Erenumab, which is another one that's been having a similar issue, and it's not available either. So I just wanted to take you through the timeline. Remember, on average, let's say 490 days is the average for Ireland in terms of getting from approval to reimbursement. Well, for fremanezumab, it's already 800 plus days. So it's getting on for, you know, almost double what was already not a very particularly enthralling timeline. It was approved by the EMA in March 2019. It was given a positive opinion in a subgroup of patients, in chronic migraine patients, in September 2020 by the National Centre for Pharmacoeconomics, and the HSE has still not made it available, and it's June 2021 and counting. So as you can see, that's a long time. So I spent some time trying to get to the bottom of all this, which wasn't easy. And the first thing I did was I looked at the statement from the NCPE when they completed their assessment in September 2020. And as I said, they recommended it for chronic migraine, but not for episodic. They wanted more information for episodic, which is fine, because basically that happens in most countries. Most countries approve for chronic migraine and then are considering episodic, so that's normal. The interesting thing on this slide is there's a little star, as you'll see, after each of the recommendations, and then it defaults to this thing at the bottom, which is this recommendation should be considered while also having regard to the criteria specified in the Health, Pricing and Supply of Medical Goods Act 2013. And I'll show you this because it's quite interesting, because basically this is their, what I call, get out of jail free card, because basically it kicks the can down the road to the HSE. But as you'll see when I show you the Act, there's actually a lot of wiggle room here. So this is the important bit of the Act, which is quite long, and I certainly haven't read all of it. But this is part 4, chapter 3 of the Act. And there's a list of things here, and I won't go through each of them individually, but what I will say, some of the lists here, they have to consider all these things when deciding whether to reimburse something. But importantly, there are a couple of things in here which are not bound by anything, and to me are very broad and can really lead to something being put on the shelf for ages before a decision is made. And in particular, if you look at, I mean, you know, equivalency between Ireland and other countries, that's all standard stuff, that's not a problem. But there's things like the potential budget impact of the item, and the resources available to the executive. So what it's saying is what worries me about those two statements is that how is a decision made then? You know, how do you make a decision? If you have a budget and you're concerned about the budget impact, or your resources are too low, who decides and how and why what then doesn't get reimbursed? So I think there's too much wiggle room in this, and it really doesn't. It's not, as you can see, it's not time bound. There's nothing in here that states anything about time. It just says, you know, hey, we'll do this. So that's kind of interesting. There is a group within the HSE called the Drugs Group, and they meet every month to decide whether or not they think it's okay to move ahead and reimburse something. Well, what I can tell you is fremanezumab, as you saw, it was basically given the go-ahead, at least in chronic migraine patients, in September 2020. But it didn't really surface, wasn't really considered until the March 2021 drugs group meeting. And what they did was they met, and this group agreed with the NCPE, the HTA, and said that that yes, you know, it should be available to people with chronic migraine who failed 3 or more prophylactic treatments. But then comes the caveat. This positive recommendation is conditional, I've ringed it in red, on a managed access program being implemented that would ensure individual reimbursement approval for this subgroup only. So again, I just want to highlight that because this is another step, basically. And the issue for me is that if you look at any country in the world, whether it's, you know, America, the UK, or whatever, these managed access programs are really common. I mean, you can go on the internet and you can pretty much find these things for the CGRP antibodies from a range of American insurance companies, because they're all online because of the Freedom of Information Act. So these things have been, and it's for this group of patients, you know, chronic migraineurs who fail 3 or more treatments, and they're designed to assess when the doctor wants that patient to be on the drug, do they fit that criteria? So these forms, these programs exist. And so really, frankly, all you need to do is, you know, download one of them, copy it, you know, tweak it a bit to make it more amenable to the HSE in Ireland, and then you're good to go. So to me, it's not that this managed access thing should take, you know, months and months and months to do. It shouldn't, frankly. So anyway, that was the sort of, that was the next step that was in place. So it didn't become available in March 2021. And what I can tell you is that, let me just get one bit of paper from the other side of the table. Yeah. Yes, I just want to get my facts right. Apologies here. And it's important. I think it's really important. This point I'm going to make in a second. There's no slide on this, but dupilumab, which is another monoclonal antibody, was approved at the January drugs group meeting. And also it was the same. They required that it had a managed access program. And that managed access program was written and approved on March the 2nd. So it was done in less than 2 months. Dupilumab is a drug that's being used for basically eczema, adult eczema. So for some weird reason, that's done, but fremanezumab's one for migraine is still out there somewhere. So that was kind of interesting, but it's not consistent in my view. So who are the managed access who are the people who because this was a real chore to go and find out this particular piece of information, but essentially the HSE have what's known as a medicines management program, and the medicines management program aims to promote, what they say is they aim to promote safe, effective, and cost-effective prescribing, basically. As you can see from the logo, you know, preferred drugs, the right choice right now. That's their motto, although I'm not so convinced about the right now. But in 2013, they were set up to work with a number of other groups within the HSE to provide leadership relating to issues such as the quality of medicine management process, access to medicines, and overall expenditure on medicines. And so this is the group, and I know who heads this group, but I don't know anything about the other people in this group. You know, it's very opaque. It's not very transparent as to who sits on this in this group and who comes up with a managed access program. What I do know with the managed access program that's being proposed for the anti-CGRPs for migraine patients is that at least two neurologists, Martin Rutledge and Paula Hardiman, are both involved in producing that. Unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to talk to either of them about you know, what their expectations are as to when that managed access program piece of paper will be finished, and we can then see what they've decided, because that would be important. And I think the good news is that when they actually do these things, they are available on the website, so you know, you will get to see it, which is good. But there's another really important piece to this. This is the managed access isn't just about, well, you have to define who the patient is, etc. The other thing that's important with managed access is it also defines who will be allowed to prescribe these new drugs. Okay, And that's something I think that's really important. And that won't be obvious from the actual managed access program bit of paper. So that's something I think we as the MAI should try and get an understanding from the HSE as to who actually is going to be able to be part of this managed access program and prescribe to the patients who desperately need these drugs. And I have a huge concern about that. The one thing I don't want to see is that there's like 2 clinics in Dublin and 1 somewhere else, and that's it, because that wouldn't be helpful. So I think it needs to be something that really can provide care to the enormous number of patients who suffer from this disease. And based on just global statistics within Ireland itself, you're probably going to have 100,000 to 150,000 people actually have chronic migraine, never mind about migraine. So I think this managed access thing is really important, and we need to understand what the hell's going on with that. But hopefully, as I said, Martin has very kindly returned my invite for a call, and hopefully he'll be able to illuminate me maybe tomorrow when we get a chance. So my next slide reads, so what needs to change? Because things do definitely need to change. I mean, it's clear that Ireland is lagging badly, and that really there's no real solid reason for that. So the first thing in my view that needs to change is the law. That Health Act needs to change, and particularly with regard to reimbursement of medicines. Also, the NCPE need to be given legal power. So basically, for example, the HSE has 90 days to comply with an NCPE recommendation, otherwise patients can take them to court. Now, that doesn't mean to say, I mean, obviously you can't pay for everything, and not everything should be available, but at least there's an appeal process for both patients and the HSE to if they disagree with the NCPE decisions. But all this needs to be enshrined in law. And what it means is it then when it's law, it takes it out of the hands of the politicians, which means that essentially, and that's a good thing in my view, because really, I think medical care should not be driven by opinion, it should be driven by facts. And so I like law, frankly. The other thing that I think needs to change was, I think we definitely need greater, patients need greater transparency with what's going on here, which is who's making all these decisions? Why has it taken 800 plus days? Who's making the decisions and why? And it's not always clear to me, frankly, who's doing all that. And also, I think there should be easier access to information for both patients and their physicians as to what's happening with these new medicines, how they're progressing, etc. So that's important as well. And quite frankly, definitely more inclusion of patients in the process through patient organizations. I mean, as far as I can glean, there are no patient representatives in any of this, which I find astonishing. There might be one for the NCPE, I don't know, but if there are, it's not because I deliberately missed anything. I haven't. It's just that it's very hard to get to the bottom of all the information here. But I feel very strongly that patients need a voice, and I think migraine patients can play a really important role in that, because there's a lot of new medicines coming through, and I just get the feeling we're going to have to fight for them, unfortunately. But we'll see. And also, quite frankly, I think people in the pharmaceutical industry also need to help too. There's something that happens across Europe, and it's called horizon scanning, and it's really good. It's a really good, healthy thing to do for every European country, which is any country, frankly, even the US, whatever. And what effectively that means is that the health technology assessment groups who look at how much drugs are going to cost, etc., make sure that they understand the likely drugs that are coming 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, etc., and what their impact will be on budget. So it's a really good planning tool, and there's a lot more of that going on. And as you see, Ireland does take part in that, which is really good. The other thing I think too is something that, as I was in the industry, certainly it's moving that way. And it's what's known as pay for performance. And what that means is that you only pay, the HSE or whoever pays for drugs only pays for the drug when it works. And I think that's reasonable. I think that's really reasonable. Why on earth would you pay for something that doesn't work? My analogy is if you got on an aeroplane with an airline and there was a 50% chance that the airline would not deliver you to where you wanted to go, right? So half the time you never got there. I think you probably wouldn't want to pay for that flight until you were there, frankly. So to me, I think pay for performance is something that the industry is going to have to grapple with, and they're going to have to get used to it. I think most people who pay for things are more concerned about when do you decide to stop a drug because it's not working or there's safety problems or whatever, versus when is it really doing some good. And I think patients would be on board with that too, because it conserves the cash for patients where there's a real benefit. So that's an important thing for me. And then the future. Well, there's some good things in the future. I'm upbeat. I think all these things are fixable. I don't think they're deliberate. I just think it's the way it is. And I think that with good patient advocacy and other things, we can change things in a positive way to get those timelines down. But the future. So there's two things going on at the moment. One of which is it's a bit of a mouthful. It's the BNIE AI. And what this is it's essentially a group of countries, Belgium, the Netherlands, Austria, Luxembourg, and Ireland, all of whom have relatively small populations themselves, all clubbing together to get more population. So the population is basically almost 43 million when you put all those countries together. So that carries more clout. And the idea is that there'll be cooperation on the horizon scanning I just mentioned, information sharing, policy exchange, health technology assessments, pricing and reimbursement. So that's a collaborative approach. And I think that will have a very, if it's really truly embraced, I think that there's going to be a lot of benefits of that. There is a website where I put the link down below for that. But as you saw, Belgium, I think Belgium, the other countries may essentially get things to change here in a positive way. The other one, because this isn't the only initiative, the other one is the Valletta Declaration. And this is an even bigger group population-wise, and Ireland is involved in this, but it's essentially primarily Southern Europe. And it has a very similar remit, which is to improve patients' access to new drugs, but at the same time, make sure that they can be paid for, etc. So essentially, its remit is the same as the BNIE AI, but it's a lot bigger. But as you can see, there are some interesting collaborations going on to help, because at the end of the day, you can't pay for everything, and things that you pay for should have important benefits, etc. So I'm all in favor of things being looked at. I just think it's the way in which it's done, and also making sure that decision making doesn't take forever, because if that's the case, patients suffer. So that's really it in a nutshell. And I'm happy to take any questions now. So I'm very upbeat. I don't want to be critical of the system here. I think the system works in a lot of ways. I just think that it needs input from patients and input from and some politicians, and get some willpower in to change the system, which I'm sure we could, in a way that will benefit patients, particularly in my view, migraine patients who've suffered a lot. Anyway, that's it. I'm done. So I can hand back to Sive or Pat, whoever wants to take on.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Very much appreciated. And we do have a few questions in, and if anybody else has any more questions, please use the Q&A, and we'll hopefully be able to answer them. There's just one question. Do patients only get reimbursed for the use from approval onwards, or can you get it back a back payment almost, like, for example, the Frenemanab?
No, I think basically, if you pay for it yourself privately, that's up to you. If you've gone to the, like, I mean, let's be honest, you can go up to Ulster and get it if you want it. I mean, it's up to, they're all available up there. But you know, to me, I don't think there won't be any retrospective reimbursement. The sad fact is, I think, here's how it's going to go, because I know from experience, not in Ireland, but in other countries. So here's how it's going to go. Only certain doctors will get to prescribe them. You will have to see one of those doctors. That doctor will have to have cast iron evidence that you have failed one of 3 of the old drugs, or 3 different types of the old drugs, okay? And the managed access program form will have all that on it, saying, hey, you've got to fail, you know, an anti-epileptic, probably an antidepressant, and a beta blocker, for example, right? That'll all have to be inputted, and if you haven't been on all 3, you're going to have a trial of them, and it's often a 3-month trial unless you have adverse effects, obviously, unless there are side effects or whatever. So it's going to be a convoluted process, and then only after all that's done will you then finally have it reimbursed. But up until that point, I don't think there'll be any way to claim it back. I can't imagine there would be a way of doing that, unfortunately, at least in my view. But I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong.
Thank you for that, Jeff. For the people that are listening in, and indeed that will listen after, you know, and we speak about wanting to make a change and get our voices heard, you know, with regards to getting medication put through or getting changes when it comes to law. I know at the Migraine Association of Ireland, we are huge patient advocates, but for the people that are, you know, out there and that are living with this condition and can't get access to medications, what would you suggest would be a starting point for them?
Well, I think an important thing here is to get a group of TDs together who are committed to helping patients. And, you know, I think it's important for patients to write to their TDs and say, hey, listen, you know, we still don't have access to these drugs that have been available across Europe now for over a year, and our lives are being wrecked, and do something about it. We have to get the political will to rewrite the Health Act. And that's a lot of work. So we're going to have to get them out of the bar in the Dale into the room to roll their sleeves up and rewrite it. And it's having the will to do that is an important piece in my view, because every time anyone's tried to change anything, apparently, it all defaults back to this bill. And as I told you with the bill, there are a lot of very vague things that allow people to, you know, sit on their hands effectively for months and months and months. And, you know, I'm not saying it's deliberate, it's just the way it is. And I really strongly feel that there's got to be some political will here to want things to change. And, you know, so I don't know how we do that, whether we get together with other patient groups, we lobby. I think we need to lobby TDs across the board. The other thing I want to be very careful of, because I live in Dublin, is that we don't end up, the other thing I'm very fearful of with this MAP is that, you know, Dublin does well and everyone else is traveling up to Dublin to see a doctor. You know, that wouldn't be cool either. So especially as, you know, my wife's family are all from Athlone, so I'm married to the Midlands. So you know, to me, it's very much ensuring that there's access is about being able to see a doctor and then being able to get the medicine paid for. 2 things. And I think we need to have the will to change that law, but also to make sure that we don't get restrictive practices where only 3 people in the whole of Ireland can prescribe these drugs or something crazy. Okay. You know, so I think we just need to get some light, and let's be honest, there must be quite a few TDs who either have migraine or their partners have migraine, I reckon. Anyway.
I maybe just pitch in there, Jeff, and say, you know, we do have a number of TDs in the past who have actually responded to requests from us, you know, to either ask questions and have certainly been sympathetic. I think the idea of writing to TDs is a very important one, and reminding them that people with migraine are voters and they have a substantial number of votes in each constituency. And I think that's something MAI will need to think about, rallying the troops around that. And I also think then the idea, and I know you, in the process of this research, you spoke to IPOSI, which is the Irish Platform for Patient Science and Industry. And I think they would be a good organisation to work with around common issues, and also the Neurological Alliance of Ireland in terms of neurological. There's 24 neurological organisations attached to that. And I think it is time, you know, why should patients in Ireland be waiting years longer than a patient in other countries? There's no sense to that.
Yeah, I'm with you, Pat. And also, you know, it affects every patient, not just us migraine patients, where it's affected us badly, frankly, you know, terrible, really. But as you know, the FDA have just approved an Alzheimer's drug in the United States, and I don't know whether it will be approved in Europe or not. And you know, Alzheimer's is very personal to me because my mother-in-law has severe Alzheimer's, so I live it every day. But to me, I can see them, because they're going to be terrified of that in terms of cost. And they don't need to be. What they need to understand is if it delivers benefit, it's actually going to save a ton of money in the long run. And so it's just, I want patients to have a voice, because patients are the single most important thing here. It's not the politicians, it's not the HSE, it's not the bloody doctors, it's patients. And I just want to really try and find a way to get that ingrained in the policy decision-making process, so that patients get a fair crack of the whip. Next question.
Yeah. With the research that you've been doing for all this, Jeff, and I know with all the timelines, and as you said, there's an official answer and then the actual timelines. But someone has just asked, with regards some of the CGRP treatment that they have been approved on the compassionate ground scheme. So once you've had approval for that, is there a long delay? So this person says it's 6 weeks that they've been waiting. Is there long delays with that process?
If it's something for compassionate use, then often the actual company, the pharmaceutical company or whichever company, what was it? Was it a procedure or a drug?
Just to start the CGRP treatments.
Right, okay. If it's on compassionate use, then the HSE isn't paying, and frankly, they don't care. If they're not paying, they don't care. So that will happen very quickly, in my view. Okay, now the problem for the patient comes when the compassionate care program ends, because they all end eventually, right? And then they're left in a situation where they, you know, which is desperate, where the drug actually may have helped them enormously, but then they no longer have access to it on the compassionate use program. And then they've got to go into the system, and then they're going to have to fail these other three, you know, they're going to have to then go through all the hoops. And so I think it's great for the patient that they have access to compassionate use, and it should be really rapid, which is really good. But I just want to, I want to caution them that they should, at least from whatever, I don't know which, I don't really care which company it is. They need to understand from the company what the length of time is going to be. Right? Companies normally know, but the patient should actually ask and say, am I going to get a year's worth? Am I going to get 2 years worth? Or scoop? Because I think that's important. Because obviously then eventually it'll give them an idea of when they're going to have to re-enter the real world in terms of, you know, getting reimbursement from the HSE.
Thank you for that, Jeff. I have a question as well. It's just regards with other European countries and statistics, and I'll mention Belgium, where you said that, you know, it is by law that they will have to make the these drugs and medications available within a certain time frame. Has there been any results with regards when the drugs have been approved and people have been able to get access to them? Has there been improvement with migraine treatment?
Yeah, I mean, you just look at the UK. A lot of people are taking the antibodies there now and are doing really well. And they're getting more. And you know, obviously, it's one of those things where the more people, in fact, there's data being generated now. But what happens in the UK is that when NICE recommend it, the NHS has 90 days to comply or else. End of story. And in Wales, where I'm from, Cardiff, in Wales, because as you know, Wales is different from Scotland, is different from the, in terms of healthcare. In Wales, it's 60 days. And what it says is that if a group of smart people, which is what these health technology assessment groups are, decide that it's worth the money, it's worth the money. Right, end of story. It's not, well, so it takes the politics out of it, in my view. Now, you can still, the HSE, just like the NHS, could still appeal. There is a process for that. Just like there's a process for patients to appeal if if say the HTAs decide not to reimburse the drug. But I think what I want to see is it's in law. It's not politics anymore. It doesn't matter who's sitting in flipping Leinster House. It's enshrined in law, and therefore whoever's sitting up there, has to provide if the HTA says it's worth the money. Because at the end of the day, remember what the HTA is saying is overall, if patients get their quality of life back and their lives back, and they have less doctor's office visits, less hospital, it costs less. That's the whole point. So, it just needs to get real, really.
Thank you for that, Jeff. And absolutely, it costs less, but it gives people, their health back, and it gives people a lot more freedom in the to be able to manage their neurological conditions.
Yeah, and also, sorry, just want to make one last point on this. Also, you've got to remember with governments, and it doesn't matter what the government is, whether it's Ireland, the UK, Germany, Belgium, you name it, right? You've got to understand that part of the problem is you've got the budget for the health service, which includes the drug budget, and then over here you've got the budget for social justice. And even though by giving the drug you've saved the social, you've taken 4 billion off the social justice budget because people are back at work, they're performing better, etc. Unfortunately, because these are two completely different silos of governments, right? It's weird. They don't talk to each other. It's just weird. So you've got to institute that too, which is that it should be overall budget savings, not just savings within the HSE budget.
That's very true, Jeff. And there are no more questions in at the moment. But I would like to take this time to thank you very much for all the preparation and research that you have done. It's been very insightful to see, how things are actually working in Ireland, and again against Europe as well, how they are. So we do very much appreciate that. I'll just check, Pat, if you have any questions.
No, but I think this seminar can be the beginning, hopefully, Jeff, of a campaign that we launched to address some of these issues. And I think someone has mentioned in their questions there that they've had their eyes opened, and that we need to let other people know that this is the situation. And I think maybe we'll use material from the seminar once we look at the recording in order to use social media to broadcast some of these issues. And thanks a million, Jeff and Sive, for both your contributions this evening.
Thanks, Pat. Thanks, Sive. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Much appreciated. Have a great evening.
Thanks to everybody for joining.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.